Hollywood to Hilversum. The recording sessions for the next album were due to begin at the start of November. That meant I had a couple of weeks to kill. I couldn't go home, so I took the chance to return to LA for a couple of weeks. Whilst I was hanging out there, I managed to slip up the coast to meet up with my relations in San Francisco and had a great time hanging out with them. It was during this 3-day stay that I got to experience something that has stuck with me for life. My cousins Lisa and Barbara's son Billy took a helicopter over the bay. We were down on Fisherman's Wharf early evening and the sun was beginning its descent into the ocean. I saw a sign advertising the flight and we all climbed aboard. We took off and headed across the bay area. The sun was setting and the fog was rolling in from the ocean. The lights in the city were coming on and my whole vista looked like a film set. We flew out over Alcatraz and crossed between the spires of Golden Gate Bridge. Approaching the city from that height, you have a better appreciation of the folds in the ground that have created San Francisco's famous streets. You can almost see where the land has slipped. On my first visit to San Francisco years before, I'd brought home a large poster of the sun setting beyond the Bridge of Gold and hung it on my bedroom wall for years. It could never have prepared me for the real-life experience. It was breathtaking and something that I can relive over and over in my head. If you're there, then do it, whatever it costs. It was brilliant to be able to treat my cousins to such an amazing shared experience. Tony Pope came over to LA to do a bit of business with Ron and to keep me company. We had a great couple of days hanging out in the sunshine and caught UB40 playing at the Greek. I've never smelt so much weed at a gig. The pungent smell hung everywhere despite the fact that it was an outdoor show. They just had a huge hit with I Got You Babe and Chrissy Hine turned up at the Greek to perform it with them. Tony and I end up back at the Sunset Marquee and hanging out with some of the guys, mainly Ali Campbell and Brian Travers. I was a UB40 fan and hanging out with them and discussing music and influences was very cool, even if we were probably talking drunken shite. They'd been together 8 years and still seemed to be the best of pals, and I envied their camaraderie. On the 1st of November, I left Los Angeles and haven't been back since. I will at some point in the future. The night before I flew to Holland, I got my first taste of Halloween in America. I went out with my mate Dave Kaplan to the Palace where we'd played the year before and spent the evening marvelling at the crackpots in costume. This was proper fancy dress on a scale I'd never seen before. There was a guy in the club dressed as Ridley Scott's Alien. He'd made the costume himself from cardboard and cloth and he was about 7 feet tall. After causing an obstruction in the lobby for 5 minutes, he was escorted off the premises because he was a safety hazard. Dave introduced me to Robin Williams, although I knew him as Mork from Ork. Dave and I had been smashing into some Long Island iced teas, which meant the rest of the night was a bit of a blur, but I made it home and got up to make the long flight to Holland, albeit with me head in bits. I landed at Schiphol a day before everybody else and I was met at the airport by Uta, the studio manager. We took a cab to what was to be my home for the next 6 weeks, the Jan Tabak Hotel in Bussum, about 5 minutes drive from the studio. I knew of the Dutch's liberal attitude to drugs, but I was quite surprised when Uta asked me if I wanted some Mogadon to help me get over the jet lag. I declined, but it was nice to be offered. I was dropped off with my 2 suitcases and spent the next couple of hours trying to turn my bland hotel room into something more homely, but in reality that just meant unpacking all of my clobber and putting all my cassettes on a shelf. I had a small case that I carried a cassette player around in and about 60 cassettes that had been freebies from various in-store record signings around the world. I had everything from Alice Cooper and Genesis to Run DMC and Ice-T, all grooves covered. Over the next 2 days the rest of the band arrived. French John showed up with all our gear and Steve Lipson and his assistant Hef Moraes arrived with the all-singing, all-dancing synclavier. We asked Peter Oxendale to come over for a few days in the early part of the sessions, as he'd been playing with us for the best part of a year, and it seemed a good idea to have him along. He was good fun and could be very entertaining, especially when he got to do his party piece. Whenever we'd stay in a swanky hotel that had a grand piano, then Peter would get up and tickle the ivories. He started off playing superbly, but after a couple of minutes he would throw in real clanger bum notes. This was a tribute to the comic genius of Les Dawson. He was known for performing classics like Scott Joplin's The Entertainer and throwing in bum notes at the end of each phrase. Hysterical stuff. Peter would always end his short set by pulling his trousers down to his ankles to display his ridiculous choice of boxer shorts before launching into Sousa's The Liberty Bell, or as most would know it, the theme from Monty Python's Flying Circus. If he felt particularly energetic, then his little arse would bounce up and down in time with the beat. Although he was with us for a few days, I don't think anything he recorded ended up on the album. Whistlewood Studios was set in the middle of some parkland and had a huge semicircular conservatory at one end of the building that housed the bar and had long dining tables stretching out along its radii from a central support. We'd ordered a takeaway banquet and all eat together in the evening, illuminated by the tea lights that warmed our food, divided from the ferns and trees by the glass walls. During the day we'd like to have an odd glass of beer, but it would take an age to get served. Like any proud Dutchman, the barman wanted to pour the glasses of Heineken correctly. This meant splosh, froth, scrape the froth, splosh again, and repeat the process until you have a full glass with a nice head. As much as we appreciated his art, we couldn't be hanging around for about 10 minutes waiting for half a jar. We mentioned this to Uta and she remedied the problem instantly and installed a fridge full of cold grolsch the next day. It was sited just outside the studio door and meant we only had to reach outside for the beer. Was this rockstar treatment or just Dutch efficiency? We tried to establish a good working routine with the intention of working 12 hours and then stopping. However, the routine was suspended after the first week when our finishing time was becoming later and later. The hours we were keeping would prove to be a bone of contention with Holly. It was decided that whatever time we finished, there'd be an 8-hour sleep interval. If we didn't get to bed until 2, then we didn't get up until 10. By the end of a week, the days were running into night, so we'd have to have Sunday off to reset our body clocks. We spent our first Sunday off exploring the nearby village of Bussum. We were rambling round the town and stumbled across an amazing model shop. What man doesn't love a model shop? Whether it's planes, trains or automobiles, there's always something inside to float the male boat. This chance encounter would lead to the Airfix Wars of 1985. We all bought a small model each and spent the evening in our rooms getting our glue on. I bought a small Spitfire, but it only provided about half an hour's worth of entertainment, so I decided I'd need to paint it as well. On the way to the studio the next morning, I requested a stop to pick up some enamel. 2 pots of camouflage paint. I wasn't the only one. It was only days before the habit escalated. Spitfires and Hurricanes weren't enough and we moved up to Lancasters and B-52s. Working in the studio, or anywhere for that matter, can be an intense environment and we all need to have a little wind down at the end of the day. Airfix became the lads' collective wind down. I'd get back to my room, open a bottle of Amstel and get under the angle-poised lamp at the small writing desk. I spent at least an hour a night making models and listening to the Cure's Head on the Door. This model making carried on for both recording sessions in Holland. By the end of our stay, things had got really out of hand. My last project was a 2-foot replica of the JPS Lotus Formula 1 car. The engine had about 50 pieces in it, and don't get me started on the minuscule decals. What was I thinking? It remains my one unfinished masterpiece. This ain't rock and roll, this is model making. Before we left, we donated our plastic masterpieces to the studio, and they hung the planes above the bar. I wonder if they're still there. The sessions were going well. We had the 2 24-track digital machines on the go, and every performance was being captured. The songs were all performed to a click track, and by offsetting the 2 machines, you had the capability of moving samples and performances all over the place. This meant there were times when we'd be hanging around while Steve was tweaking something. We'd play pool or chess, but this wasn't always enough to keep us entertained. One of my best memories of the first visit to Whistlewood was the phone sex session. Holland's liberal attitude to pornography meant there was always a skin mag knocking about in the studio, and Ped clocked an advert in the back of one for live phone sex. But unfortunately for us, it was based in the US and would no doubt cost a fortune on your credit card. The idea is entertained further because we realised if we make the call, we have the ability to record it and maybe use some of it on the album. We'd done stuff like this before, so we scout somewhere to set it up. We go into the company office, and the studio assistant Aaron sets up the microphone and tape, and we all have a pair of headphones each to be able to monitor the conversation. Hang on, who's paying? This was going to cost a few quid, but in the interest of science, we decided someone would. Our 3 gold Amex cards are thrown on the table, and Aaron holds out a fish with 3 matches sticking out of it. Guess who loses? So I'm in the chair with me card and dialing LA. A lovely young lady picks up and there's a brief exchange of banter. Her phone manner suggests she's booking in me car for a new exhaust, not getting ready to rinse me credit card for a transatlantic wank. If I'd been sitting there with a boner, it would have withered over the time the booking process took. The conversation goes something like this. Hi Brian, where are you calling from? Why do you care? This is a wank line, not the fucking Golden Shot. Holland. Wow, do you live in Holland, Brian? No, I'm working here. Where'd you work? I'm in a recording studio. Hey, I too work in a recording studio when I'm not talking to potential wankers on the phone. Really? Wow. Do you have an SSL desk there? Yes, we do. Wow, they're really cool, aren't they? Are you a musician? Yeah. Wow, cool, so am I. With the connection and then the call back to verify we were where we said we were and then processing me card, I've been on the phone for about 20 minutes. By now it would have required a Bear Grylls expedition to find any trace of a hard-on at the phone call being legit. We eventually get down to business. Brian, would you like 1 or 2 girls on the line? There's an extra charge for 2. Everyone in the room who has headphones on is nodding and holding up 2 fingers. Well, they fucking would, wouldn't they? So would I if I wasn't paying. 2, the wanker replied. Can you just hold the line for a second and I'll put you through to Roxy and her friend? I'm connected and this woman starts with what you'd expect to hear. Hi, baby. You got something for me? She starts a routine, and I can hear another voice in the background, which I guess is her friend, but she sounds disconnected from the conversation and is just throwing in the occasional, ooh, ah, yeah, baby. After a minute, I suss that a friend is actually on tape. The voices sound different, odd ambiances, but I'm in for 2, so I carry on. Being a phone sex novice, I didn't really know what I should do or say. Mark and Ped are mouthing and whispering suggestions, and I'm desperately trying to hold it together and not laugh, but losing the battle by the second. It was game over for me when Ped said, Tell her to stick a finger up your ass. I creased and dropped the phone. The suppression of hysteria has led to a build-up of pressure and something had to give. Me nose started bleeding, so Ped tagged me and picked up the phone. He just starts saying all kinds of mad shit, and I'm now crying as well as bleeding, and there's blood and snot all over me. Ped carries on until he's crying and hands the phone over to Mark. Have you come yet, baby? No, girl, I'm still pumping. I'm sure I just heard you come then. Wasn't me, love, I'm rock solid. She can't distinguish between our accents and we're all crying, so Aaron picks up the phone and, wanting to earn some kudos with the clients, repeats everything Ped tells him to say and he gets right into character. Ped's last request killed the recording. Tell her to shit on your chest. Shit on me chest, baby. Shit on me. I'm shitting on you, honey. I'm shitting on you. Have you come yet? Sure, I just heard you come. The headphones are launched off and we are literally on the floor in absolute stitches. Aaron had kept it together and done us all, and it had all been captured in digital stereo. The recording made it back to London but has since disappeared. That, for me, is the greatest unreleased Frankie recording. A major benefit of working in the Lowlands for me was the availability of hash. No discreet phone calls or whispering in bars to shady characters. I just had to send French John to the local coffee shop with a shopping list which was something like 2 Red Leb, 2 Sputnik and 1 00. The efficient girl would return the goods, usually saying something like, they had no 00, so I bought another Sputnik. It was like being sent out for vegetables. I guess technically he was buying vegetables, but not the kind that count in your 5 a day. Holly was still insisting on working office hours, so if we started early enough we'd see him. He wouldn't contribute a lot and was always very reluctant to sing while we were in the room, so when he did a guide vocal we'd have no choice but to leave him to it. If he thought that was what was best for him, then ultimately that'd be good for us. I think he may have felt a little guilty about the short hours he was keeping because he developed this bizarre ritual. When he came in, he would set up his little plot somewhere in the studio with his bag and his hat and his coat and his Walkman. After a couple of hours, he'd move the items one at a time to a table by the door. Over a couple of trips, his stuff was moved from one side of the studio to the other, and then he'd call a cab and wait in reception. When the cab arrived, the studio door would open slightly and his arm would appear and lift the items out one by one. He never seemed to say goodbye or see you later. He'd just disappear, and sometimes it'd be a couple of hours before we noticed it. Wolfgang had come to Holland with Holly and he was going through a bout of ill health. Holly never chose to share the extent of his illness with us, and maybe if he had, then the following weeks may have been a little different. I can't remember how the subject came up, but we were in the studio and Holly wasn't happy about something, and Steve Lipson was trying to convince him otherwise. The lid was about to come off the pot. Holly wondered why the producer wasn't there. Trevor had told Holly that he'd be producing the second album. The rest of us had been told that Steve Lipson was producing the album and that Trevor was to be an executive producer, overseeing the project and getting involved when the initial recordings had been done. Steve had been told that he was the producer. The people dishing out the info was ZTT. Classic confuse, divide and conquer. Holly wasn't really happy with the sound of the tracks and thought they were heavy rock, and I think he believed we were having too much influence in the direction of the music. He'd never make any suggestions as to how it should sound or what should be changed to improve it. On the other hand, we loved the sound of the tracks and we'd have probably ignored them anyway. There was a continuity of sound to them that had been lacking on Pleasure Dome. We thought it sounded like Frankie, but a brasher, louder, heavier and more aggressive Frankie. We thought that it was heading back towards the original raw sound, more attitude and less production. When Holly would have put his vocals on, I don't think there'd have been any problem identifying the sound as us. When the misinformation surfaced about who was captaining the ship, it caused a rift between all the confused parties, and things would need smoothing over for the project to get back on track. Holly had appeared to be less than interested, and the confusion around who was in charge was putting the project in jeopardy. Lipson downed tools and went back to London until he found out what was going on, and we decided that we needed to have a head-to-head with Holly. To be fair to Holly, we didn't know or appreciate the strain he was under looking after Wolfgang, and we didn't know the extent of Wolfgang's illness. How could we? We hardly saw him, and when we did he never mentioned it, so there was yet again more confusion. After the day in the studio, we went back early to speak to Holly and clear the air. Tony Pope had come over to umpire and make sure tempers and egos didn't become frayed. Confusion over who was in charge and Holly's apparent apathy towards the project needed resolution. We all retired back to the Yan Tabac to lance the boil. We went into Holly's room and the atmosphere was pretty awkward. We weren't ganging up on him, but he felt we were. We just wanted to know if he was still committed to the project. Why was he sneaking out of the studio when he did make an appearance? Why was he negative about the music? We were concerned and our motive had been to clear the air and wave the olive branch. We wanted him back in the gang. Questions were asked and Holly felt like he was being cornered and bullied. We just wanted answers. Like it or not, our futures were still intertwined at that point and we wanted to know what was going to happen down the line. Holly lost his rag and thought the best form of defence was attack and he started shouting and told us to get out. We left. The crack had just got a little bit wider. We're close to the end of the session, so we decided to carry on recording anyway. The next day in the studio, we're still smarting for being asked to leave his room and there are still answers required. The consensus of opinion between us was that he was finished and we were in the market for a new singer. Who should we get? Who do we want? Who do we like and get on with? Somewhere from left field, maybe Paul, suggests Simon Le Bon. Why not? Power Station was doing its own thing, and although the remaining members of Duran had formed Arcadia, there didn't seem to be any firm plan about their collective future. Let's ring him up and ask him. A few phone calls are made to mutual friends across the globe, and we eventually track him down to an apartment in Paris, and Mark rings him up. No answer. Well, he's got to go to bed at some point, hasn't he? After several attempts, Mark eventually gets him on the phone, and there's the exchange of formal pleasantries before Mark throws in the curveball. Do you fancy being the singer in Frankie Goes to Hollywood? I would be the perfect singer for Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Well, that was a good start, but our fledgling supergroup was doomed before it got off the ground. Simon, being the gentleman he was, and still is, said he couldn't leave his fellow band members. Duran Duran was more fractured than we were at the time, and Simon's loyalty lay with his mates. He said he was very flattered, but declined our offer. Shit. That's a bummer. Who else was there? Let's ring Wiley. Pete Wiley was a fellow Liverpudlian, a mate and a singer, and we all loved him. Why not? So Mark rings him up and he's not in. Well, he's got to go to bed at some point, hasn't he? We keep ringing until Pete's dulcet tones are heard on the other end of the blower. Mark does the same dance and the same small talk and throws his second curveball of the night. Listen, Pete, we're doing this album and it sounds boss, but H ain't into it and I think he wants out. Do you want to join our group? Wiley's more flabbergasted than Simon was, but went on to explain that he was in the middle of recording his own album and he couldn't or wouldn't do it either. We got blanked twice in a night. We must be shite. Luckily, we were close to Christmas and returned to Merseyside. All thoughts were directed towards spending a few weeks at home with our families and letting the whole situation calm down for a while. Apart from the odd visit, we'd all been away from home since April, and we were all looking forward to being back with our family and friends. The rough mixes we had of the tracks were sounding great, and maybe the Christmas break would give us all a little time to cool off and reflect on the future of the band. That may have been my short-term future, but it also made a decision about my long-term future. Claire and I were going to get married the following year.